This is something that used to really scare me, and I didn't want to do it at all. I've always got at least one with pests or coming out of the woods with pests. There's a massive difference between health in a plant and growth. So I've got a lot of very big plants, most of which I grew from very small plants. Like, for example, my Monstera deliciosa here, I grew this one from a 1-leaf cutting, and I managed to get her to size up and mature pretty quickly. And although all plants have their individual and specific care needs, there are some things that I do that I'm certain have helped to get mine to size up quicker. So I'm going to take you through all of those today. But first, if you're new here, hi, my name's Claire and this is Yoli. I make videos all about houseplant care, sharing tips and tricks I've learned over the years to help keep your plants happy and healthy. And yeah, this is just going to be a very relaxed kind of chat about everything that I do. So grab a cup of tea and make yourself comfy, and I hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it. So I haven't done just like a sitting down and talking video for a while, and it feels a little bit strange. But I've brought across a couple of my very big plants just to kind of briefly talk about before I get into the tips. But if you've been on my channel for a while, then you'll know kind of the backstories to both of these plants, because they're two of my favourites. I talk about them all the time. This one here's my Monstera dubia, and obviously it's not kind of maybe not the sort of plant that you would, if you hear Monstera dubia, not the sort of thing you'd think of, because it's very large and fenestrated, and I've spoken about it in so many other videos before. I do love the Monstera dubia in both of its forms. I love its kind of younger shingling form, and I love the mature form as well, but my goal was just try to kind of bring out the best potential in the plant. And so now I've got lots of sections of the dubia, but this one I've had for about 1.5 years from when I first got it. So if I hadn't chopped this plant, it would probably be, I don't know, 8 or 9 foot tall now, which is pretty insane. And this is another one that I've done the chop and extend on, and I think I've also had this one for about 1.5 years. I got this one as a little 1-leaf cutting from Memo, who's Houseplanty Goodness on YouTube. I got it from another plant swap, which was, yeah, as I say, I think about 1.5 years ago now, and it's just given me the most insane growth in the time that I've had it. And yeah, again, if I hadn't chopped and extended this plant to try and conserve bigger growth, it probably would be as tall, if not taller than me now. So yeah, I guess kind of like the first thing to talk about when you're trying to get your plants to size up and mature quickly is light, because it's so easy when you Google care needs of a certain type of plant, or someone kind of gives you advice. A lot of the time what the sources can be referring to is environments in which your plant can cope. And I think it's just really important to kind of stress the fact that coping and thriving are so not the same thing. Like, I've got a lot of plants that are very well known for being low light plants, because yes, they'll do okay in low light, they will still look lovely and conditioned, but if you are trying to get them to grow faster and produce beautiful kind of bigger mature growth, a lot of the time, not always, but a lot of the time, that's not going to be the case. So for example, when I first got the Monstera dubia, I was told that it was a plant that could kind of grow in medium to low light, and I was like, that's amazing. I was like, awesome. I had it down at first in my basement bedroom with me at that time, and although it was putting out some growth, it just wasn't really, none of its growth was particularly sizing up. It looked lovely on the plank I had it on, but I was like, I'd like to try and get it a little bit bigger. So at that time, my mum I was living back at home, and my mum had a conservatory upstairs, and so I brought it up to the conservatory, and that's when I started noticing the most insane amounts of growth in this plant. And again, it's something that is really important to say in regards to light, and again, I've made videos on this. I've had lots of experiences where I haven't done this properly. Acclimating your plants to different lighting conditions is super important, and it's something that nowadays I cannot rave about enough. The Monstera deliciosa that I showed you in the intro to this video, I didn't acclimate properly over summer, and it ended up getting very burnt, and I almost lost the plant. So if you're not familiar with acclimation, all it basically means is just very gradually easing your plant into life in a new environment. So for example, when I first brought this one up to my mum's conservatory, I didn't put it right up by the window. It wasn't getting any direct sun. Nowadays, I have trained the plant to be able to get direct sun, but it has been through a very, very gradual process of doing that because, like I say, if you don't take it slowly, then you do risk damaging your plant and actually stunting its growth. And obviously that is not what we want to be doing. But yeah, nowadays I do grow this plant, as I've just said, in full sun. And I think that is part of the reason why our growth is just getting bigger and bigger. And even though we are coming out of growing season, we're in the end of October here now in the UK. Typically it's the time where a lot of plants would start to slow down, like the hours of light are much less. This one, I mean, I don't know if you can see, but at the top here is also giving me a new leaf, and this leaf has not even finished hardening off. It's giving me almost a new leaf every kind of 2 or 3 weeks, which is insane. And a lot of my plants are still doing that for me, because I know during the winter months, a lot of people tell you that that's the time where your plants might go into dormancy and they might not give you as much growth. And while that is true, a lot of the factors as to why this is true comes down to light. And if you can essentially mimic growing season conditions in your own home, then you're going to be able to keep your plants growing pretty much at the same rate the whole year round. I know this isn't always doable for everybody, but things that, like, again, things that might seem really, I don't know, really just obvious, but keeping your plant's leaves clean, that's something that I go through phases of being very, very lazy with it, and then I'll suddenly notice that they're dusty and I'll be like, oh my God. But going into the darker winter months, that is even more important, because basically having a layer of dust or dirt on your plant's leaves essentially kind of acts like a curtain hanging over them, and it just means that they're not able to absorb all the light they need in order to be able to effectively photosynthesize. They're not going to be giving you as much lovely growth, and it also means they are going to be much more susceptible to pests as well, which is something that you just don't want to be dealing with when you're trying to achieve lovely, healthy, big growth in your plants, because it overcomplicates everything and it slows the whole thing down. So although a lot of the time what I'll do, I've got a pair of microfiber gloves that I use. I'll just go around and I'll wipe all of my plants' leaves. Obviously, I use it as an opportunity to pest check as well. And if you're not pest checking, then you do risk potentially spreading something from one plant to another. But often if I want it done really, really quickly, the other thing I do is I just take my plants through to the shower. I've got a detachable shower head and I just spray them down, and assuming they're ready for a water as well, this can be a really good way to kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone and get it done quickly. And the other thing that I've just touched on, but is really, really, really important, is the hours of light that your plants receive. Because like I've just said, during the winter months, the hours of light are much shorter. And even if your plants are in a really good position lighting wise, even if they're right by a south facing window, if they're only getting like, I don't know, 6-7 hours of good light a day, then it might not be enough for them to be able to keep kind of pushing out growth to the level that you want. And there are some things such as, again, like I've just spoken about, keeping your plant's leaves clean, keeping your windows clean as well. That's something that, again, just I don't think is talked about enough. If you've got lots of dust and dirt on your windows, that's stopping light from effectively getting through and targeting your plants. But also using grow lights. And I mean, I've got lots of cabinet spaces in my house, like propagation areas, cabinet spaces that I do use purely grow lights. I've spoken about the grow lights that I like to use before. They're from a company called Mother, and I will link them down below. But that is something that you can absolutely do if you don't want to run them all day long, even to just kind of prolong the light a little bit. Like, for example, I've got my grow lights in my bedroom that come on first thing in the morning, and they help to get me out of bed because they feel like natural light. They just give my plants that extra few hours of light in the morning that they wouldn't usually be getting because the sun hasn't come up and it doesn't move around to that side of the room until the afternoon anyway. And I have spoken in other videos before as well about how you can use things like tin foil to reflect the light of your grow lights. And like, for example, if you can't afford to run grow lights all the time, which a lot of us can't right now, you can use reflective objects. Why am I explaining this so badly? You can use reflective objects to essentially create the effect of having more than one grow light. Like when I was back at my mum's house, I had little grow lights in my propagation cabinet, and I would put tin foil going down the back wall of the cabinet, essentially just increasing that light even more for my plants, which I thought was a pretty good trick, and I found it to work really well. And then the other thing that I do there, I actually brought it over to show you. I was going to say none of this video is sponsored, by the way. I'm not getting paid to talk about any of these products. But the other thing that I use particularly over the winter months is Photo Plus from Liquid Gold Leaf, and basically this just allows your plants, they call it sunshine in a bottle. It doesn't, if your plant is not getting any natural light, then it's not going to help it grow, but it just helps to maximize the light that it is getting. So for example, as I've already spoken about, during the winter months when it's not as light and bright, if you use some of that as a foliar spray on your plants, it's just going to help them to absorb and get the best out of the light that they are receiving. So yeah, I use that when it is a little bit darker, especially if I don't want to be running grow lights as much, just because it helps to encourage lots of lovely new growth in that way. And then something else that's really important to think about is the soil or substrate that you use for your plants. And this is something, again, that I had absolutely no idea about when I was first getting into houseplants. I'm still learning about it, to be honest. There's still a lot that I don't know. But the one thing that I do know for sure is that a lot of these kind of cheaper garden centre soils, just the kind of the bog standard things that you can go out and buy very easily, are often treated with lots of nasty chemicals to prevent things such as pests, but there's a whole bigger conversation to be had here about ecosystems in soil. But a lot of them are treated with chemicals or heat treated, meaning that a lot of the beneficial things in the soil are killed off. A lot of the beneficial microbes will be wiped out, meaning that planting your plant into them isn't actually going to be doing it a lot of favours in terms of creating and growing a lovely healthy plant. Essentially, healthy ecosystems in the soil equal healthy plants, and healthy plants are just going to be much more resilient. They're going to be able to grow much bigger and fuller and healthier faster. They're going to be less susceptible to things such as pests. So yeah, I use a company in the UK called Soil Ninja, but basically what you want to look for is just a soil, assuming you are using soil as a substrate. I'll move on to other things in a minute. But you just want to look for something that hasn't been treated with lots of nasty chemicals. So something organic, some people call them raw soils, and that is what I would always recommend going for. Again, the soil mix that you might choose comes down again to the individual type of plant, so always do your research. But again, there are a lot of companies nowadays, I know we just mentioned Soil Ninja, but that do pre-mixed soils for certain types of plants. Like I think they've got a Monstera philodendron mix and alocasia mixes and all of that sort of stuff. So if you don't want to faff about mixing your own soils, you can get that pre-done already. But the same applies when coming to choosing things like, for example, propagation mediums like sphagnum moss. That is something that, again, like I know I've said before, you can get it at kind of, I guess you'd call them big box stores in the States, places like B&Q in the UK. I occasionally will do that for things such as moss poles, but on the whole, again, buying live sphagnum moss that hasn't been treated for the same reasons is very, very important, particularly for propagation and moss poles. In fact, it is where your plants are going to absorb lots of micronutrients, and you want to be giving your plants the best stuff if you're trying to achieve the best in them. You can also reuse it as well, so it's not like you use it once and then you chuck it away and can never use it again. If you treat it right, you can continue to use it, and I tend to get about 3 or 4 uses out of my sphagnum moss, which I don't think is too bad at all. And then the other thing to be very mindful about when talking about soil health and picking the right soil is just being very aware about what you're putting into your soil, because there's so many, again, I've spoken about cheap garden centre soils. There's so many things nowadays, you're like, I don't want to name and shame brands, but brands of, for example, Fertiliser, where you will be able to just grab something that promises big, healthy growth very quickly, and actually a lot of people aren't that clued up on what they're actually putting into their soil and what it's actually doing to the soil, and how it might be very destructive to a lot of the natural compounds in the soil. And although that might kind of shock your plant into suddenly having a growth spurt, there's a massive, massive, massive difference between health in a plant and growth. And when I talk about healthy, like mature growth in a plant, I focus on growth that I feel like is stable and something that is gonna serve the plant for a very long time. Like, I don't know if that makes utter sense how I've just said that. But I try to focus on creating positive longevity for my plants as well as something that is just immediate. So again, like I've now spoken about liquid gold leaf, I use liquid gold leaf fertilizer just because, again, it is very, very focused on the beneficial microbes within the soil, maintaining a natural ecosystem, supporting the natural compounds that are already there in your soil to just kind of bring out the best and allow your plants to absorb the best as well. Because if you just go fungus gnat, I'll get into pest control in a minute. Yeah, if you go just throwing anything kind of willy-nilly into your soil without actually knowing how it's going to affect the soil, it doesn't matter how good a soil mix you're using because your plant's not going to be able to be getting everything it needs from it. So yeah, just do your research. There's other very good products. I know I speak about liquid gold leaf a lot, but there's a lot of other very good ones on the market in different countries. So just make sure you do your research. This is all a learning curve. I'm still massively learning with my plant collection. There's just stuff that this is like documenting my gardening journey. I was going to say I'll put information out on the things that I feel confident talking about that I've discovered in the hope that they'll help you, but I am very much learning with all of this as well. So yeah, and the other thing that if you've watched my other videos, you'll know I'm banging on about a lot at the moment is the use of semi-hydroponic growing. And I know there's lots of different semi-hydroponic mediums that you can use. The one that I have suddenly come around to is the Lechuza Pon mix. I know I've spoken about Soil Ninja. I'm preferring using their equivalent at the moment just because it doesn't have the added fertilizer, because again, I like to use the fertilizer that I know and love. And there's lots of benefits to semi-hydroponic growing in this way, and I've covered a lot of it in videos kind of in the last few months. I've spoken a lot about it in my repot and chats and plant chores videos. But for me, one of the massive benefits of semi-hydroponic growing that I've found is that you're far less susceptible to things like root rot because you're able to really monitor the roots for your plant in a way that you're just not able to if you're growing your plants in soil. If you've got a very large collection, it just makes maintaining them so much easier. You can just fill a little water reservoir and not have to worry about it. So there's been times where I've been away from home quite a lot in the last kind of 6 months, and people that have had to come in and look after my plants. The ones in semi-hydro I just haven't worried about because it's very hard to overwater them. Also with substrates such as Lechuza Pon, they're just brilliant because they are very porous, and it just means that your plant's roots are able to get lots of oxygen, which again makes them less susceptible to rotting. And there are some plants that I've noticed that prefer a semi-hydro mix as opposed to others. Like I've had more luck with some than I have with other types of plants. Alocasias are one that absolutely love it. In fact, I've been able to turn quite a few corners with alocasias I was struggling with before by using semi-hydro. And the majority of my aroids, to be honest, there's none that have responded really badly. There's some that have just taken a little bit longer than others to adjust. I personally wouldn't put, I mean, maybe I'll try it at some point, but I wouldn't personally right now put my succulents and cacti in semi-hydro with a reservoir. I might try it just without and just watering through as and when, but that's something I haven't properly experimented with currently. But yes, as I say, semi-hydro is something that I am loving right now, and I'm transferring so many of my plants into it, and I'll link some useful videos below if you're interested to know more about semi-hydro, because as I say, I have spoken about it a lot recently. But going back to what you put into your soil, I know I've already spoken about fertilizer, but moving on to kind of like the pest control element of things, because I've done things very differently over my time of owning plants. There's been times where I've been pouring all sorts into my plants. I've been spraying all sorts all over them to try and get rid of pests, because if you've got a lot of plants, pests are something that unfortunately from time to time you probably are going to encounter. I don't think there's ever been a time in the time that I've had a big collection, I don't think there's ever been a time that I haven't had at least plants and recovery. I've always got at least one with pests or coming out of the woods with pests. But again, anything you put onto the leaves of your plants, anything you put into the soil of your plants is going to be absorbed by the plant. And if you're not putting good stuff onto or into your plants, then you're not going to have healthy plants. And like I've already said earlier in this video, healthy plants are much less likely to be affected by things such as pests, and they're going to give you lots of lovely, beautiful, healthy, mature growth faster. So this is one of the main reasons why currently I don't tend to use chemical pest treatments or systemic pest treatments on my plants. It is something that I have very much done in the past. I did it for years and years and years, but I'm now, I think, about a year and a half completely chemical free. I say completely chemical free. There are times where if I think I'm going to lose a plant because an infestation's got so bad, I will go in with pesticides, but I like to not have to do it the majority of the time just because I want to keep the plant as healthy as possible. So yeah, it's kind of like a life-death situation that I'll use them now. But on the whole, I use predatory insects. And again, I have made a full video on how I use predatory mites to tackle pests. And for things like fungus gnats, which I need to deal with later today, I use I always say nematodes, but I think it's actually meant to be pronounced nematodes. And you basically just mix them into your water and you water your plants through with them, and they actually help to enhance your soil health. So they focus on all the good things that I've already spoken about, but they also attack the larvae, which is the stuff that typically can bring your plants down quite quickly and stop infestations of fungus gnats very fast. So yeah, they're absolutely brilliant. I just ordered some have arrived today, so I'm gonna get on doing that after I film this video because I am currently struggling with fungus gnats. But one thing that I've just kind of come to accept is that although pesticides, systemic pest control can get pests gone quite quickly, as can biological pest control, there's nothing that is ever going to completely eradicate them and ever stop them from coming back, just because it is a natural cycle. Like outdoors, when you go out for a walk, there's going to be natural predators as well as prey that are everywhere. So yeah, I think normalizing having pests on your plants from time to time isn't a bad thing. It's only infestations you need to worry about, like the odd pest here or there. It's gonna happen. But as I say, I have made a video about biological pest control, predatory mites, all that sort of stuff. I know it sounds scary. I promise you it's not. In fact, I actually think that having pesticides in your home is scarier. So again, I'll link that video down below. But the one thing that I haven't spoken about yet is watering, and like it might sound so incredibly obvious. Again, like every different type of plant will have slightly different watering requirements. Some are going to like to completely dry out before you water them again. Others are going to like to be kept consistently moist. That again just comes down to research on what the kind of plant likes. But I think the main thing to say is that there's a conversation in the plant community about whether top watering, like conventional watering, or bottom watering is better. And I have spoken before about why I'm not a massive fan of bottom watering. I know it can be great if you are trying to tackle things such as fungus gnats, for example, because it means that the soil isn't as saturated after watering and fungus gnats can't breed in there as easily. Again, if you're using things like nematodes or mosquito bits, I don't think this really matters because they will eradicate the problem for you. But I just think that there is no replacement for top watering, purely because it does also push down a layer of oxygen into the soil. It helps to keep your soil nice and airy and not as compact, and essentially allows your plants to breathe better. I will occasionally bottom water if I'm running out of time and I just want to put all of the plants in the bath and just let them feed from the bottom up. But that is a very rare occasion. The majority of the time I will water all of my plants through from the top. And the majority of my plants, I do just use normal tap water to water them. I have got a couple that can be a little bit finicky and do need kind of more fancy... Oh, I don't know what that noise was. I don't know if you heard that. But needs something slightly fancier, like distilled water. For example, I got a pitcher plant, an Nepenthes, fairly recently, and apparently it's quite typical with carnivorous plants, but they typically do prefer distilled water, so I am using either distilled or rainwater for that plant currently. But for the others, as I say, I do just use normal tap water and they are absolutely fine with that. You can fill your watering can like the night before and leave it out so that some of the treatment chemicals can evaporate if you prefer to do it that way. It really comes down to where you live as well, because if you're right in the middle of a really busy town or city, your water is obviously going to be a lot harder than it is if you're out in the countryside. Typically, I have found that most plants, in a similar way to how I spoke about earlier in the video with acclimating them to different lighting conditions, I've personally found that a lot of my plants can be acclimated to the water that I give them as well, so long as you kind of ease them into it. This is also why a lot of the time, if for example I import plants and they're used to very different things, I will use distilled water as opposed to tap water straight away and kind of gradually ease them into it. But yeah, as I say, also using rainwater is a really good idea. And even when it is just very rainy here in the UK, I will sometimes just either put my plants out on my balcony or leave a bucket out and collect rainwater just to kind of use as a treat for them, because they do really, really love it. And I am 100% an underwaterer as opposed to an overwaterer. I know I always say, if anything, teeter on the underwatering side because you'll avoid issues such as root rot and stuff like that. I think, to be honest, part of it is just laziness for me. I know that a lot of my plants are more drought tolerant than I give them credit for a lot of the time. And so even some plants like, I mean, calatheas can be a little bit dramatic if you let them dry out too much, but even my calatheas nowadays, I tend to let the top layer slightly dry before I water them again. So yeah, as I say, I know some people are slightly over, some people are slightly under. I'm personally under. And another thing that I think has made a massive, massive difference in how quickly and how big my plants grow in a short space of time is the temperature that I grow them at. And this has kind of not been intentional. Like, I know tropical plants typically do tend to prefer a slightly higher temperature to grow in, but I have just so happened to live in places where the temperature is quite high. Like when I was back at my mum's house, as I've already spoken about, the conservatory there, as soon as the sun hit it, it was very, very warm. I mean, most days it was between kind of 25 and 28 degrees Celsius. Oh my goodness, in the summer months, it was actually a nightmare. It got up to, I think, about 45 degrees Celsius one day during the big heat spike that we had. And that was too much, but on the whole, due to their natural growing conditions, a lot of tropical houseplants that we grow in our own homes do prefer the levels slightly higher. So yeah, the flat that I'm living in now as well, I'm on the top floor. It's a timber framed building. It gets pretty good natural light. I do get quite a lot of direct sun. And for that reason, again, as soon as the sun hits it, it does get very, very hot. So even during the winter months, I would say it's quite rare for the temperature of my place to drop below about 18 degrees Celsius. I know I am very, very, very lucky in that sense, but higher temperatures do tend to equal faster growth because, as I say, it mimics their natural habitats. You can absolutely use heat mats and stuff like that to try and increase the temperature a little bit for your plants. And also creating a cabinet environment like I've done here is absolutely amazing for tropical plants. I've raved about it in loads of videos before. And in fact, the cabinet that I've got through in my bedroom, which I will put a clip in of, that one I actually got for about £20 off eBay, and I just converted it into a grow cabinet. So if you're on a budget and you want to create a space like that, you can actually do it for not that much money at all. So yeah, that is something that I would definitely recommend doing. Oh, my camera battery just died. Sorry about that. Where did I get to? Temperature. I was talking about temperature. So yeah, typically, again, like just trying to mimic the conditions that, I mean, I know not all of your plants grow in the same conditions naturally, but like I just try and emulate like a little bit of rainforest in my home, and it just seems to make the plants really happy. And so leading on from that, humidity as well. Humidity, so I might be wrong about this, but I don't think humidity actually affects the speed of your plant's growth. In my experience, it hasn't massively affected the speed. Temperature, light, those tend to be temperature, light, nutrients, good soil, all that sort of stuff. They tend to be the main ones. Humidity, though, does impact how it develops and how conditioned your plants are. So for example, like with a lot of tropical plants, if you grow them in very low humidity levels, then a lot of the growth you're going to be getting is going to be very kind of brittle and not as resilient. You're likely to notice lots of cracked leaves, lots of brown tips, lots of things like that. So although, like, I've said it in other videos, but I have really struggled with humidity since I've moved here, and all of my plants have had to adapt to slightly lower kind of normal conditions, because before I was able to keep the humidity at like 80% every single day for them, and the humidity naturally here in this flat, if I wasn't running humidifiers, would probably be around about 40%, and I alternate when I run humidifiers and when I don't. So yeah, it's something that don't get me wrong, it is important, especially for certain types of tropical plant that are very sensitive. Calatheas, again, for example, if you were to try growing them in very low humidity levels, your plant would not be happy at all. But in terms of the rate of growth and the maturity of growth, I wouldn't say it is the most important thing. It's still important, but it's not the most important thing. And then finally, I'm trying to think. I made some notes here and I'm kind of glancing back at my notes, but I think I've covered most things. Finally though, the other thing in terms of, again, getting your plants to size up, become lovely and mature, is not being afraid to chop them back from time to time. And this is something that used to really scare me, and I didn't want to do it at all. And these two plants actually have been kind of breakthrough for me in making me feel like I can chop my plants back and get really good results. Because often, firstly, if you're wanting the plant to kind of fill out and become a little bit more bushy, especially if you're working with vining plants like this one, actually giving it a bit of a prune back from the main stem will help to activate some lower growth points. It will just help your plant to fill out and become much fuller, but also conserving the larger growth, which again is what I've done with these two. I've done what's known as the chop and extend on both of these ones. So I'll have them root into a moss pole that they're growing on, and then I will essentially chop the moss pole in half once they've formed a good aerial root system, and then I will pot them back up. They won't have any roots in the soil or substrate to start with, and as time goes on they will start to develop a root system. And yeah, as I say, that is something that frightened me for a really long time, but it is getting easier now that I'm seeing good results. But yeah, if I had to summarize it, I know I've gone into more detail here and I hope this was clear and understandable and not too waffly. But if I had to summarize it, I would say light, temperature, humidity, yes, humidity, but soil and nutrients are just so important. Like for the majority of my collection, if I wanted it to grow even faster, I would probably up the light, up the temperature, up the humidity. And typically, as I say, this isn't specific to each individual plant, but typically that would really help. And that is what I've done so far. So yeah, I hope this was useful. And if you've got any questions, please drop them down below. And if you liked this video, please make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, have a lovely day, and I will see you in the next video.
Bish bash bosh.